Hey there again, AP Environmental Science. Here we go with sustainability, economics, and equity. This is a two-part series here. We're going to break this down into sustainability and economics together, and then talk about the regulations that affect equity. So as we talk about sustainability and economics, be able to explain why efforts to achieve sustainability must consider both the actual environment that it surrounds and also the analysis of is it economically valuable or not. Environmental scientists also work with economic analysis, and those two things are really closely connected. Describe how economic health depends on the availability of natural capital and just basic human welfare in general. Sustainability is a relatively new and evolving concept in contemporary environmental science. We've seen that something is sustainable when it meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations, to meet their own needs. So although human needs can be defined in various ways, for our purpose, we identify the basic necessities as access to food, water, shelter, education, and a healthy, disease-free existence. In order for those five necessities to be available, there must be a functioning environmental system that provides us with air to breathe, drinkable water, and productive land for growth and growing food. Also fibers to make goods and other raw materials. The ecosystem services that we have described before are what we're talking about here. So the quest to obtain resources and increase well-being, which is the status of being healthy, happy, and prosperous, has caused individuals and nations themselves to exploit and degrade natural resources like air, land, water, wildlife, minerals, and basically entire ecosystems. So to address questions of sustainability, we need to be able to understand where human well-being and the condition of environmental systems meet and where they conflict. In order to do this, we'll consider economic analysis, ecological economics and ecosystem services, and the role of regulatory agencies in bringing in environmental regulations and protection. And in an attempt to reduce environmental harm, researchers and policymakers alike have experimented with various techniques to encourage consumers to change their behavior in ways that would benefit the environment. So we've explored some of these techniques earlier as we discussed what we call externalities, and we've also discussed them before when we talked about air pollution allowance or free charge of taxes and such. But basically, we're all talking about the use and the emissions of certain pollution and how that evolves around money and sustainability. So economics is the study of how humans allocate scarce resources in the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. And throughout this whole section, we are going to talk about many concepts in the field of economics. And we will look at a problem from the externalities point of view and pollution and try to use economic theory. Life cycle analysis is very similar to what we call the cost-benefit analysis that economic policymakers use. And in this section too, we're going to look at some basic economic concepts and learn how they can be applied to environmental issues. When I started my undergraduate program, I realized very quickly that economics was something that was not necessarily in my field of study that I really enjoyed. And I took several economics classes. And also, getting a degree in economics is one of the few social science degrees that actually is a Bachelor of Science degree, not necessarily a Bachelor of Arts degree, which means that you got to take some math along with it in science classes so that you can better understand how economics work. Supply, demand, and the market. In today's world, most economists and the market economy, it's very simplistically put. A market occurs wherever people manage and engage in trade. And in a market economy, the cost of goods is determined by what we call supply and demand. And when a good is in great demand and wanted by the people, producers are typically unable to provide an unlimited supply of that good. So, price is a method that producers and consumers use to communicate the value of something and the value of an item to basically allocate its scarcity. So, this illustration shows the relationship between supply, demand, and price. The supply curve, labeled S, shows how many units that suppliers of the given product and service. So, for example, let's talk about like t-shirts. Are willing to provide a particular t-shirt at a particular price. So factors that influence supply of the good include like input prices, like the cost of the actual resource that the producer needs to obtain in order to produce the item. And then of course technology, expectations about future prices, and the number of people selling this product. So for example, if you want only one person selling t-shirts and many people want t-shirts, you would be willing to make the investment required to produce as many t-shirts as you could. However, if a new t-shirt seller comes along, because you will be concerned that you are not the only one selling as many, then you will decrease your production because you know that you must share the market with another supplier. All right. So the D curve, or what we call the demand curve, shows how much of a good consumers want to buy. So factors that influence demand include income, prices of related goods, taste, expectations, and the number of people who want the good, period. For example, if your boss gives you a raise, you may like that you can now afford that T-shirt that you've always been wanting to buy. Demand. Notice that the demand curve slopes downward. In other words, as the price of t-shirts rise, the demand for them declines. So this illustration illustrates what we call the law of demand, which states that when the price of a good rises, the quantity of demand falls. And when the price falls, the quantity of demand rises. So in reverse, the supply curve slopes upward. This reflects the law of supply, which states that when the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good will also rise. And when the price of that good falls, the quantity of supply will fall. The law of supply and demand make basically some sort of intuitive sense to most people. I mean, after all, if you're selling t-shirts and you find that your profits have shrunk, no pun intended, you are more likely to use your own resources to produce and sell something more popular and make more profit. If you're a consumer of t-shirts, the less expensive they are, the more you're inclined to buy them. So with these different interests, how do supply and demand, how do they ever meet? Well, in the market system, without any restrictions like taxes or other regulations, the price of goods will come to point E, the equilibrium point. And that's where the two curves on the graph, where they intersect. Here, quality demand and the quantity supplied are exactly equal. At this price, suppliers find it worthwhile to supply the exactly however many t-shirts are consumed and people are willing to buy. Unfortunately, markets composed of buyers and many sellers, they do not always take all costs of production into account. We've already seen in some cases where land degradation, where people and organizations or even governments deplete or damage a natural resource, because they do not bear the direct cost of, degrading that land. And things like that where that happen is the purchase price is called an externality. It's not part of the overall equation here. And when we pollute air or water without directly paying for it, that is also an externality. When we account for the cost of externalities created by manufacturing a good or offering a service, the price changes, and in turn, it affects the demand and the supply. Let's look at another example. Let's talk about coal, for instance, because that's a different resource than t-shirts, right? The dollar cost of coal-generated electricity includes the cost of coal, the cost of paying people to operate the power plant, also the cost of basically what it would cost to distribute electricity to customers. Okay, I'm sure that's just a big general category. However, the cost to the environment of emitting sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and other waste products these are all negative externalities. And then largely, we're basically missing from the price that the customer is actually paying. So these negative externalities, they certainly add cost. Financial, well-being, environmental. Someone with a respiratory infection, they could also incur an even greater cost, right? Because now if they live near the power plant, there's a lot of particulates in the air that can definitely affect their health. There may be provisions requiring polluters to pay some sort of this cost, related to their admission, but often these payments are not nearly sufficient to cover the total cost of the actual pollutant. We can charge taxes and emissions taxes on our cars, but at the end of the day that you're causing more damage than $10 a year, basically, by your car. And in addition to that, they often do not reach the people who are affected anyway. So the $10 that you pay to have your emissions tested on your car isn't going to the person who has a respiratory ailment. Okay, so let's just say here that the dollar cost of the good included externalities like expenses that occurred by emitting pollution in the air and other expenses relating to like removing the pollutions from the air. And then the cost for the items to be produced would be so much greater, right? I mean, this would only occur if a tax were imposed by some sort of regulation agency or government. When the cost of production rises due to this tax, the supply curve shifts to the left from S to S1, as seen in this diagram. When that happens, we have a new market equilibrium, and it's at a higher cost. And as a result, fewer items were manufactured and fewer items were purchased. So in other words, including the externalities raises the price and lowers the demand. Therefore, the price that includes externalities is more reflective of the true cost of the actual item. And so this is really what the graph would do or change if we took into account all the environmental pollution that was caused by making you a t-shirt.